Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and policy impact. I'm Govindraj, Ethiraj. India's rural economy is in distress. Continued weather shocks, fallen global food prices and thus lower exports, combined with a cutback in spending on safety net schemes, has compounded the problem in recent years. Now, the situation is alarming because almost half of India's GDP comes from rural areas and 58% of rural households are dependent on agriculture. Now, last year, agriculture growth was a negative 0.2% and this year it is estimated to be 1.1%. While the agriculture sector is crying for budgetary support, it is also important to highlight the nature of intervention. Simply put, should it be subsidies or should it be in the form of triggers for economic activity, and what should those specific steps be? To discuss this, I am joined by Joshi, Chief Economist of rating agency CRISIL, and Madan, Sabnavis, Chief Economist of rating agency CARE. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. let me begin with you. You've authored a report very recently on this subject. Now, where do you feel is the most critical area of intervention, particularly when seen from a union budget exercise?
Well, I think there are two issues here. One is the present stress. I mean, as you rightly mentioned, the failure of monsoons, two consecutive monsoons, and in between, I think excess rains have amplified the stress in the rural areas. But I think underlying that, I think there's a deeper problem, which is that the agriculture sector hasn't got the attention that it deserved over the last couple of years. I think the vulnerabilities have risen, the weather has become more freak, the farm productivity is not improving, and on top of that, the farm economics is actually worsening. I mean, so I think, and these are all, and these issues, the budget I don't think can address. So what I would look forward to is in the budget is that at least I think they should have a very comprehensive program which they are going to implement over the next 2 to 3 years on agriculture sector, which combines not only budgetary support but also things like the other reforms. What are they going to do to develop markets in agriculture? What are they going to do to improve the R&D situation? How is it going to be diffused to the farmers? And then I think you have the issue of wastage, and I think so there are many dimensions. I think some of these things can be addressed through the budget, and rest I think will have to be done outside the budget. So I think what I'm saying is that I think you cannot ignore agriculture at this juncture.
What's your sense? I mean, is it? I mean, there's a federal role and there's a state role. So how do we play this out, or how does this play out?
No, actually, Govind, if you look at agriculture in India, it's actually a state subject. So to my mind, I think the major focus has to be coming from the state governments if they have to address the issue of agriculture. The central government can only provide a very broad framework, and to the extent that intervention is possible at their level, it should be done. So therefore, I think that expecting so much from the central budget, I don't think is very rational. And if you look at what normally the central government has been doing, is that you have the NREGA program, something which definitely needs to be strengthened, because we have seen that in times when the monsoon has failed, right, NREGA has been useful in terms of providing an alternative income for farmers. So that's something which we should continue. We can have a different debate about how useful it is, whether it's productive or not. That's another set of issues, but we need to have
But the reasoning now seems to be that we must continue, and
we have to continue, and probably it has to be scaled up, given the fact until such time that the farmers actually can get adequate income from their regular income. The second part which I see, something which happens every year, is we have a number of loan waivers which happen on account of agricultural stress. And invariably the pressure is put on banks, because they'll have to first give up the loans and later on you come and claim it from the central government. And I think one particular scheme which they've introduced, the crop insurance scheme, I think is very useful and pragmatic. Because I think this is actually nipping it in the bud, because the moment you have the insurance given to the farmers, as and when the crop fails, you don't really have to resort to things like interest loan waivers. You're actually, they're automatically getting compensated from the insurance companies.
Right. So, let me come back to you. I think so there are two parts to it. I think one is what the government will try and do to improve the fortunes for the farm sector, but more importantly, what do the farmers themselves want? So, one of the things is obviously crop insurance is a solution to problems or tragedies faced in agricultural crops, but 46%, as I could see in a survey of farmers, feel that they don't even want a crop insurance or not interested in one. So, is there a fundamental problem here that we are unable to fix?
Well, I think I would see greater need for crop insurance in crops which are commercial crops, so to say, where the risk is high. And I think for instance, I think in Punjab, Haryana, there is very little crop insurance for rice, wheat, etc., because you have enough irrigation cover for them. and they are actually in some sense protected from the vagaries of monsoons. So I think it will not be that you can't look at the crop insurance as an aggregate for all the farmers put together and for all the crops put together. It will be more appropriate in the case of commercial crops and the crops that are more exposed to the vagaries of weather.
How do you expand the area under irrigation? Now, where does that ball land?
Well, I think as far as area under irrigation is concerned, I think we still have a long way to go, but now I think you have to change the approach. There is, along with the need to irrigate more area, there is also need to conserve water. So you have to move towards those techniques of irrigation which are water conserving, and I think which include things like drip irrigation, etc. So I think that there needs to be a change, a shift in approach. I mean, building big dams or creating big water reservoirs may not be the solution right now. Maybe you need smaller solutions like check dams and backed up by stuff like drip irrigation, etc. Basically, which look at conserving water.
We've been aware of this problem for many years. We're obviously trying to address it, but yet the nature and the magnitude of problems only seem to increase every year. Whether it's to do with irrigation and thus ensuring that crops are watered, our inability to prevent the impact of weather shocks, or on the other side, finally, when you actually grow the crops and you try to supply it, the problem at the market end.
See, there are actually two parts to it. One is that agriculture today has become less attractive for farmers, and we have seen in certain geographies people are migrating away from agriculture to the urban areas, maybe in construction work or so. That's one part in terms of interest has come down. Second, we always look at agriculture only when it fails. So because we've had 2 successive years of droughts, I think that's the reason why we're talking about it. And again, as I told you, almost every state government as well as the central government's hands are tied. So while we need to invest more in terms of land development, in terms of irrigation, bringing back the green revolution so that agriculture becomes more sustainable.
But we've tried that too. Previous budgets have talked about a green revolution in the East.
But nobody actually talks about the actual kind of investments which take place. So I think unless we go in for something like state farming, it may sound fairly outdated today, but I think the government actually needs to get into this particular activity, because what happens is when agriculture fails, the problem comes back to the government. Like just look at it when the tur dal crop failed. It was the central government running around trying to sort out the problem. So why doesn't the government get into this kind of an activity? That's automatically the resources will come in. You will also get the labor. You'll be able to provide employment, and you'll probably be mitigating this the possibility of.
But are you saying in a more permanent way?
In a more permanent way. It has to be done in a permanent way, because when the problem is there, the solution always falls back on the central government. Whereas honestly, I don't see why the central government.
You're saying instead of a bucket list of solutions, then have just one solution and
just
get into
one solution,
farming.
and states can do it for specific crops which are vulnerable in their territory.
DK, do you quickly agree with that? Should the state be getting into farming if rather than trying to provide a multitude of solutions?
Well, I think they should. My sense is that rather than actively getting into farming, they should provide. They should try to de-risk the sector, and I think let the farm economics improve on its own. I mean, and I think it can be improved because our yields are very low, and I think you need some investment there. And I think if you do them, then you can make farming more lucrative, so to say. And the government had promised 50% returns to farmers, and I think actually the returns to farmers have been declining over the last 1 or 2 years.
Okay, so let's look a little forward then. If we are to say that structurally things have to change, we have to remove people who are dependent on the agricultural sector from agriculture or from rural India and move them to other occasions or other geographies and therefore different pursuits. What could we be doing now to set that process going? I'm also granting that some work has been done.
Well, I think if you want to move people out of agriculture, it's not going to happen in a day. I think most of the countries have followed a model where you move people from the primary sector, which is agriculture, towards secondary, which is manufacturing in an industry. I think there is a challenge there because manufacturing, despite all the efforts, I think it will take time for manufacturing to pick up and absorb the kind of inflow of people we have in the economy. And as you rightly said, you also need to move people out of agriculture into other activities. So I think I see it in two ways. One is that you need to, in the short run, you need to provide a safety net or a buffer. And I think over the long run, you'll eventually have to move them out of agriculture. And for that, it becomes very critical that the manufacturing activity picks up, and not the general manufacturing, but the manufacturing of the variety which absorbs labor, like textiles let's say leather, garments. I think the high-end manufacturing is going to be labor displacing. I mean, so it's a major challenge.
Yeah, go ahead, Madan.
No, actually, Govind, I wouldn't agree with this that we need to move labor out of agriculture. See, it may sound very tempting, but today when I have a fundamental problem of an agricultural production which is not increasing at the rate at which it should be increasing, we should try and commercialize agriculture, make it more attractive, and not really try and displace agriculture by moving people to manufacturing.
No, but I think the assumption is that you don't need so many people to produce
no, but
so
we
much.
do, because we are happy with the kind of the quantum of output which we are producing.
No,
and
what about yields? What about productivity?
So I need to first increase the land under cultivation. I need to get in better seeds. I need to improve my yield. Now, if I'm not able to do it, there's no point in just moving agricultural labor out because A, they don't have the
So how would you prioritize it? We're running out of time, so quickly.
No, we need to continue to focus on agriculture, commercialize it. I mean, get in your corporates, get in your contract farming. I think this has worked very well in certain geographies.
But you also said the state should get into it.
The state is the second alternative. This contract farming are specific corporates who have gone in and made a difference. But then they're also commercially oriented as long as they're able to, it meets only their demand. So when you talk of a company like Mahindra, or you're talking in terms of Godrej getting in, it actually helps in terms of their own business. But for making it generalized, we need to have larger investments, which only the government can do.
Right, for which we need to obviously look back at the budget, and that's what we are here for. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Madan. Thank you, DK. We need to go in for a break. Coming up on the other side, we look at the tax challenges that India is facing once again, particularly on the retrospective tax issue. Stay with us. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Telecom giant Vodafone was sent a reminder notice by the Income Tax Department for paying capital gains tax on a 2007 deal to buy Hutchison's India mobile business. Now, Vodafone reacted by confirming receiving that reminder and pointing out that there seemed to be a disconnect between the Prime Minister Modi's efforts to promote a tax-friendly environment for foreign investors and the tax department. Revenue Secretary Hasmukh Adhia later said the tax notice was a routine notice of sending notices in cases where collection of dues was not stayed by any court. The party can always approach the assessing office with a request to stay the demand as per law, he said. Now, in 2012, the Supreme Court had ruled that Vodafone was not liable to pay the $2 billion in tax, but the government changed the law that year to tax such deals retrospectively. So the larger question we are asking today is, what is or should the government be doing to ensure that there is a tax-friendly administration? And more importantly, can we see specific steps in that direction in the Union Budget 2016 that is coming up? To discuss this, I'm joined by Paresh, partner Ernst & Young, and Rajesh, Gandhi, partner Deloitte, Haskins & Sells. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. So Paresh, let me begin with you. So there are some things that have been achieved in terms of steps taken to ease tax administration, make the tax administration friendlier. And there are things that have not been done. So let's quickly cover what has been done so far in the recent past.
See, I think the question you started was, did tax terrorism return? I would like to say that if you look back 1 year, government has achieved a lot of things. What were the pain points because of which India as a country got a bad name? Primarily it was because of transfer pricing.
Okay.
Lot of things on that part has been achieved. For example, the advance pricing agreement, where the taxpayer, multinational taxpayer and the government can upfront enter into an agreement and agree on the transfer price, the price at which they are going to deal on goods or services or royalty on any matter with their related party.
Got it.
Over 700 applications have been filed.
So related party could be, let's say, a Microsoft selling software to its Indian company, which in turn is selling it to consumers or customers.
Absolutely. So I think already 40 have been filed. That's a good, big achievement. And I think, of course, the government can do more by ramping up and speeding up the entire
so
process.
That is one.
Second, the mutual agreement procedure with United States is also now working. Over 100 cases on IT/ITS segment has been signed, covering almost 5,000 crore of worth of taxes. I think that's the second big achievement.
But this only affects the information technology.
Yeah, but the whole channel between India and United States on resolving cross-border disputes is now working. That's the message. Third, lot of small points like e-filing of appeal against an order before the Commissioner of Income Tax. You can now actually send your submissions to the tax officer via an email. I think we all used to complain we all have to go there and all that stuff. So these kind of small points have also been addressed. What is really missing? I think on your macro point, India still does not have a regime where you can upfront walk to the government and say that, hey, there is a debate, let us do a negotiated settlement. That is point number one. Second, India still does not have in a big way a scheme where in advance you can kind of go and ascertain your taxability. Of course, now in the last budget, the advanced pricing, the authority for advanced ruling has been expanded. Indian residents can approach over 100 crores, but the benches are not functioning. There's only one bench in Delhi. There was a promise that the benches will be expanded. I think that has not still happened.
Right. Okay. So you're saying at least when it comes to business or doing business, there are elements of tax administration which have been simplified, and you've given 2 good examples. Do you want to add to that, Rajesh, or do you feel that we still have a long way to go?
No, so I would echo what Paresh mentioned in terms of the overall mood, which is positive, and in terms of the steps what the government has taken. Because if you recollect in 2014 when this government came to power, I think they had very clearly mentioned that there will be no retroactive changes to law, something which mentioned about Vodafone in the beginning, something which gave the Indian government a lot of bad name in the international community, and I think they have lived up to their promise. Of course, there was the MAT issue which came in last year, but in all fairness to the government, it was because of a decision of the Advanced Ruling Authority in Castleton, which happened before they came to power.
So let me ask the question, the Vodafone question a little differently. Are we seeing only the residue of what happened a few years ago and the income tax department chasing it, or should there be cause for concern?
No, I think it is more of a residue, because the government obviously has to do a balancing act. You cannot be seen as being favoring one side or the other. So I think they are trying to do a very balancing act. The arbitration, I think, will be a very promising way to get out of this Vodafone controversy, and hopefully if the arbitration proceedings can be completed in the next 1 or 2 years and we can get a amicable solution, I think that will be a good way out of this. But overall, I think as Mr. Modi and as the FMS promised in 2014, we haven't seen anything negative new coming out in the last 1 or 2 years. In fact, some of the positive things have been, and I'm waiting for that, for particular amendments in the budget, is one is on the TARC. The last report of the TARC, or the Tax Administration Reform Commission, came in Feb 15. So obviously the government didn't have much time in the budget to make changes. So I'm expecting in this year, in the budget, there will be some important announcements or changes in that.
Can you suggest one which you think is important?
So for example, one could be on trying to align the CBDT and CBEC. I think the government has already taken some steps, but today we see a lot of kind of difference in views between CBDT and CBEC on common transactions. So there taxpayers obviously not happy because they end up paying double tax, or even in the overall administration. So that's one area where I can see some positivity coming. The Issuer Committee report, the first part of the report came very recently, and there the Issuer Committee has made some very important and good recommendations. For example, on less than 5 lakhs, if you're earning income, then that should be treated as capital gains. Similarly on section 14A, and on, for example, professionals, because they form a very significant chunk of the population where there might be some tax leakage, so they're having a presumptive system for that. Then adjusting demands against refunds.
Right. So how much of that do you see actually translating into?
I think some of that should be, because that's part 1 of the report, and the Issuer Committee has taken the most simpler issues first. The complex issues will come later on, where there will be difficulty, but I think some of that might find way in the budget.
Right. So if you were to list, Paresh, the 2 or 3 things that you would definitely want to see in keeping with easing tax administration and making the administration friendly, as has been claimed by the government, what would they be?
I think first of all, on the budget, the substantive provision side, government last year promised that we will reduce the corporate tax rate to 25%. I would really like to see at least some amount of reduction happening on that, because 25 has to be reached in 4 years. UK and other countries are already at 20. They are proposing to reduce to 17%. Second, which also of course then means that if you are going to remove the exemptions, then where is the real need for minimum alternate tax? Because MAT, which is minimum alternate tax, was introduced only to ensure that at least some amount of tax is paid where there is an exemption, and 20% of MAT is very high. That is dampening. The second,
what is the international?
So internationally, typically some countries may not have
MAT
at all, and even if they have, generally it will not exceed 50% of the normal corporate tax rate. I think even the dividend distribution tax for.
So you're saying if tax rate is 30%, then it would be 15%.
Yeah, and if tax rate is going to be 25%, then it should be 12.5. And if exemptions go away, actually there is no need for a minimum alternate tax. The third is dividend distribution tax. It's very high. Effectively, it is 20%, and it is, remember, it's economic double taxation. The company has already paid tax. Then there is a dividend distribution tax to be paid, and the expenditure which is then attributable to the dividend which income which you and I or other businesses get, that is not allowed as deduction because of section 14A. So that is a real dampener, and either the rate has to be reduced or at least section 14 has to be aligned to allow the expenditure which is earned towards earning that dividend, because that becomes then triple whammy, not even double whammy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So Rajesh, anything that you want to add on the to-dos list?
Yeah, so I think I've been thinking about the corporate tax rate, and it's interesting what Paresh mentioned. The bad part is that the direct tax collections are not on target so far, so government is obviously very keen to meet the targets. So in that environment, with their promise to reduce the rate from 30 to 25, how much they'll be able to do it this year, I think it will be very interesting to watch, because they obviously want to maintain their targets and fiscal deficit at the same time. The other challenge is, now with the budget around the corner, a lot of these committees and with the various initiatives like Make in India, Startup India, there's a recommendation and demand for incentives. So trying to balance that, but at the same time saying that we don't want to give incentives, we want to reduce incentives. I think that balancing act
and that's a good point, right, Paresh? So, on one end we are saying simplify and makes administration simpler, and therefore at the same time you're saying here are a whole bunch of new incentives for which you need more administrative effort.
Absolutely, but let's not forget that unless the exemptions go away, the rate cannot come down, because you cannot really have a big dip.
Right.
So it's either reduce the rate and take away some of the exemptions, having sunset clauses. I think there are another lot of big issues also. For example, income computation standards. It's a nightmare. Suddenly it came out of nowhere from 1st April 2015.
Who does it affect and how?
It affects almost all the taxpayers who have business income.
Okay.
And what it primarily does is that even if in your accounts, the income is not really accrued, but for tax purposes you have to pay tax on it, and it's a double whammy again, because even if expenditure you are recorded in your accounts, but for tax purposes either you have to capitalize it or you get a deferred expenditure. So I think, in my view, there's an immediate need to first defer ICDS and then introduce at the right time after polishing it.
Right.
Second, most Indian multinational groups big groups have gone abroad, and there are rules called place of effective management, where if the place of effective management, let's take a Tata Group or Birla Group or a Govindraj Group, they have gone abroad and done investments and they have subsidiaries outside India. If the place of effective management of that particular subsidiary, let's say in US or Europe, is in India, the entire company becomes resident of India.
Right.
So while this is an accepted international norm, but there are a lot of kind of concerns.
So who will pay the tax and where?
How,
whether the two
when
countries
the
will,
POEM rules will be implemented.
Right.
So that is the second part.
Right.
I think third, even on individual taxation, there is an expectation that the inflation related adjustments for salaried class, let's say standard deduction or a medical allowance, or let's say even children's education allowance and even the basic exemption limit. I think most of us fight over from what income the tax starts. A lot of people forget that in India we have one of the lowest rates at 10 lakh, where the highest rate of 30% applies.
Right.
Internationally, it can be as high as
We've run out of
20
time
lakhs.
almost. Jayesh, let me get a last word from you. What's the one thing that you would look forward to, particularly from an administration point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a very important
It could
question
be
you
a-
asked, because
yeah.
I think the biggest thing which I look forward outside the budget, especially is on administration, is the change in the mindset. Because if you see at the ground level today, things haven't changed a lot. For example, we see corporate clients where there is an assessment or scrutiny going on, and they ask for comparing details between the AIR, between what is filed in the TDS return 26 days and my financial account. So there is a little bit of still a room or an environment of suspicion, which I think
I'm just coming from a tribunal this morning where the
Did you
bank
win or-
account was of a very big company was attached without giving any notice, and tribunal took them to task. There is clearly a change of mindset which is required.
So especially with foreign investors, I think that harassment or that kind of environment has to change.
Right, and if you improve the mindset, hopefully many of these sort of unachieved aspects will get achieved.
Because
as
it's
well
not
in
only
this
about
budget.
how, whether you collect tax, how much tax you collect, how you collect tax is also important.
Right. That's a good note to end on. Thank you so much. We've run out of time on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.